Yeah, we're almost at the 2-year mark. You were my very first guest that I ever interviewed on the Curious Dimension podcast. And it's been almost about 2 years. And just so everybody remembers, Scott is an architect, a researcher, an excellent geometer, and is very interested in lots of different types of subjects. And for anybody that hasn't watched our first podcast, I thought that was, even though it was my first one I ever did, I still think that was one of my better ones and one of the more fun ones I ever did. So go back and check out episode number 1 with Scott Onstott.
I've been enjoying your all the guests you've had and just seeing the arc of your interests in selecting guests that you want to interview. It's really interesting, and it's a huge crossover with my interests. So yeah, it's I always look forward to your episodes.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been a interesting education, and it's fascinating to see because I mean there have been certain guests that I've pursued that I've been really interested in their work, and then there's been other people that have come to me that I didn't even know about, that had interests and had done a huge body of work on things that I was kind of subconsciously wanting to get at. One of my main interests is these cross sections between mathematics and geometry and the paranormal. And, how would you link those two things? And this was one of the things I really wanted to do at the beginning of the podcast. And there have been people that have come my way that are fitting that sort of that box nicely. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been more fun than I thought it was going to be. So I'm really
Cool.
enjoying it.
Yeah.
Scott, you've recently written 2 books that I want to talk about. One is Late in Space, which is a fictional book, and the other one is The Unlikely Cartographer, which is kind of your story of your life and sort of your arc of philosophical ideas. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. Yeah. The way it came about was I had written an autobiography or memoir that I never published because I felt like it was very cathartic for me to write it. But then I thought, well, who would be interested in my life? Just why? Usually, when you read a memoir, it's of a famous person or a celebrity. And then so it's just been on the shelf. And then I wrote a book called Sacred Geometry, Philosophy, and Worldview, which is all about my personal philosophy that I've developed over the years. And it's a bit dry. It's dense with material, and it therefore the audience for that particular book is rather small.
When did you write
So
that
what
one?
I wrote that one.
When
And
did you write that one?
oh, when did I write? What, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe.
Okay.
And then I combined the two using AI to help me to recontextualize how I could weave my personal story into my philosophy so that it would be more readily understandable and have a more human hook to the philosophy. And I feel like it was very successful, but as the author, I don't have the distance. So I would love to hear your impression of how that came across, how that landed with you.
Yeah, I think it came across very clear of what you were doing. In the beginning, you were talking about, your early life and your ideas of the world that was shaped clearly from your upbringing, from your relationship with your father. You're showing this side of you before you're sort of coming of age. And you're starting to explore the world around you, not just in your physical world, which you get into a lot, which I think is an important part of that book because it shows the challenges that you're kind of going through, but then also these philosophical challenges that you're going to. It's almost like you're really looking for more information, more data to help you grapple and understand this world around you. And I think that comes across very well. And the other thing you did was you waited to the end of that book to explain to the reader that this has been a collaboration between your work and the artificial intelligence that helped you formulate and craft those ideas. And you did a very important thing, and then I'll pass this back to you. You explained how you're kind of like the conductor of an orchestra, and the way that you're massaging and prompting and directing the AI is very important in that process.
Yeah, that's the analogy I'm using to help people understand that the creative direction comes from the composer of it, and it's conducted through the AI to the artificial musicians, if you will, who play the music. But what it's done is it's taken me to a higher level of orchestrating this process of writing the book. And I feel like it gives you a greater scope of power of what you want to of how you want to work. If you employ these AI tools in the way that they're, I don't know, most leveraged or most powerful for you, it's not. I think a lot of people have a misconception, and it reminds me of my grandmother, who's long deceased, but how she viewed technology was like it's all computers now. And in her mind, it was just like you push a button and it does all this stuff. And that was just a real naive view of technology. And I think in a way, people today maybe have a similar kind of naive view of AI. Like you just tell it to write a book and it does it. Well, that's really not true at all. There,
Right.
there's so much work that you have to do to make a book with AI. It is a collaborative process. And that's how I kind of had unlocks in my own mind about using it when I started to think of it less as a tool and more as a collaboration with this kind of virtual mind. And then I was able to bounce ideas off of it. And it's like having a great editor who has infinite patience and is available whenever you have the inspiration to ask it a question. So,
Yeah, and I think you're right here. So, I think the leveraging the AI to maximize creativity is a very important point here because, as an instructor, I'm seeing the full gamut of students utilizing artificial intelligence. We have everything from students blindly using it and copying and pasting to students that are using it to further their mastery. And I think there's going to be a huge wide open gap here for people that embrace this and know how to use it properly. They're going to excel, and their creativity is probably gonna go beyond anything that we've seen in in human history, because these tools are gonna allow you to solve problems, in 1 to 3 years, which could have taken 20 to 40 years previously because of the heavy lifting that the AI can do. And so I think it's really important that you say that this way of leveraging it to expand human creativity. I wanted to talk I wanted to go in another direction real quick just for a minute and talk about consciousness, and I think you cite Bernard Kastrup a little bit in your book, is that correct? Or you
in
you you
one
give a little
place I
nod to
do, yeah.
Bernard?
Yeah.
Okay. I think you talk about disassociation as a way that's not a psychological pathology, but really a way of tapping into something deeper. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, that comes from directly from Castro. That's his idea. And I found it really compelling to understand idealism and how we can get an profusion of seemingly separate minds out of one consciousness.
Mhm.
And the mechanism is dissociation. So we can understand that in terms of human pathology. When someone is in a dissociative state, it's like they have multiple personalities, let's say.
Mhm.
It's the older way of talking about it.
Mm.
I think it's a way of partitioning consciousness into different minds, because that's a fundamental problem. If you believe all is consciousness, well, then how do you explain all of the different minds that people have and different we the problem is our language. We often say, like, you have a consciousness and I have a separate consciousness, but I try to make the distinction, and I would say that we have different minds rather than different consciousnesses, because there's
Mhm.
only one consciousness, and is colored by all of our past experiences in life. And so that's maybe why I chose to weave my memoir into my philosophy so that you could understand where I was coming from in my particular journey and how I
Mhm.
arrived at these thoughts and these philosophies, which I think are useful for a lot of people to contemplate.
Yeah,
Uh, does that make sense?
it absolutely makes sense. And maybe we should just touch on real quick for the audience. Can you explain to everybody who Bernard Kastrup is and his significance?
I see him as an excellent teacher of idealism, which is the opposite of materialism, which is kind of the dominant paradigm of today in science. It's instead of believing that there's a physical universe outside of you, it's believing that there's only consciousness and that all of the physical universe is an idea in a greater mind that we're interacting with, that we are a subdivision of. And so there's no thing out there. And in a way, I think science has known this for about 100 years now that we've had quantum mechanics that long.
Mm.
When we look deeply into the structure of what we think matter is, we find that there's nothing there. There's no thing, there's no ultimate item, because when we look at the atom, we thought, oh well, the atom, that's the building block. But then we split the atom and we see, it's made of quarks, and in the end it's all math. It's all relationships in number and geometry.
Mhm.
So this is a hook into my whole love of sacred geometry is
Mhm.
understanding that is these patterns are a way of how the universe, how consciousness built the universe was
Mhm.
through geometry, through number. Geometry is numbers expression in space, but
Mhm.
it's all necessary. Like if you can imagine that you were this infinite consciousness and you wanted to create a universe, you'd have to start somewhere. How would you do that? I think that using math and using the first principles of, drawing a circle and moving then to the edge of the circle and drawing another circle, then you have the vesica piscis form, and then from there it's an explosion of geometry that can come out of that, and it can tile space. You start to realize that you can move around in space, that you have somewhere to be in this infinite nothingness. Now suddenly you have something to contemplate. And I think that's the very fundamental essence of the beginning of how consciousness made a universe. And so I'm really interested in that process. And I think people in general are when they play video games, because we're interacting with these worlds that humans have built. And in a way, we're recapitulating the creation of a universe when we play a game or interact with this virtual world and so on. There's just
Mhm.
a natural inclination for consciousness to want to do that. And in a way, our playing of games is evidence of that impulse to create or to become enthralled in a world. And in fact, I think that's what happens when spirit descends into the matter of the world, is that we are playing a game. And we've forgotten that we're playing a game. And yeah,
I mean, that makes total sense to me, but I can imagine people that are totally invested in the materialistic world would struggle with these notions, even though, like you said, we know that when you start breaking down matter into its constituent parts, there's nothing there. And so that goes for your bones, that goes for your blood, that goes for the neurons in your brain that you think is you. And so what you think is you is not, because when you start to break it down, it's all just energy, light, and vibration when you start to break these things down into constituent parts. So then you have to ask yourself, so what are we? Well, what makes sense is that mind comes first, consciousness comes first. And I know that's the hard problem, but when you really think about it, and these aren't new ideas, by the way, these are ideas that have been in old ancient texts where I think in Hermeticism, they say all is mind. And, in the beginning, there was the all, right? And so I can see people that have a materialistic view would struggle with this, but it makes a lot of sense to me.
I think materialism is a simplification of reality that is useful because it is simple and direct, but it is also missing a huge aspect of existence, which is your inner life. Your materialism, in a way, doesn't have room for consciousness. That's why it's called the hard problem. It can never solve because we can explain all of these things outside of us in the world, but we can't explain how we have a perception. How is it that we have, how is it that when you assemble your body out of a bunch of parts about, or assemble something out of unconscious lifeless matter, how does life occur and how does a perception and a perspective emerge from that? And I think we just leave it as a mystery. We call it emergence, or we call it the hard problem, but it's also our first person undeniable experience that we all have.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah,
One of the things that you're revealing is the synchronicities, the patterns like sacred geometry in places that most people kind of overlook. Do you believe these patterns are do you think they're intentional, unconscious, or perhaps evidence of like a deeper reality? And this goes back to the kind of idea that human beings may be like mound building termites, sort of a situation, or is it all conscious?
I think it's all conscious. And the termite analogy is useful to get us out of our own boundary of our ego and our individual minds, to recognize that these termites seem to build these elaborate mounds that have architecture and air conditioning and farming and all this stuff that would clearly go beyond the mind of any individual termite. They're following some kind of plan, an orchestrated supermind that seems to be coordinating their actions. One can postulate or theorize about that. Even though you can't point to that mind and you can't weigh and measure it, it seems like there's an intelligence that is coordinating the action of all the termites in the mound. And in a way, humans could also have a super mind that's coordinating all of our actions in some fashion, creating these patterns on the earth that I've explored in my documentary film, Secrets in Plain Sight, for example, is my other fiction that I've written. But the point is that it's all consciousness at different levels, different layers of the onion is what I talk about. How when we see these uncanny patterns in the world or in the cosmos, or the hexagon on the North Pole of Saturn, for example, you wonder, how is it that geometry is showing up on this macrocosmic scale? Isn't that revealing something about the way that the universe is made? Geometry underlies it all. And how can that be if geometry is supposedly an idea that humans invented? It isn't. It's something that was there already. It's something that we discover. And where was I going with this? I was trying to show that there's consciousness. There's only one consciousness that is filtering through all these different minds down to your individual mind that is driving your life and your body. But I think that there's even probably a cellular mind within you that's coordinating all of the activities within the cellular boundary. I don't know that for a fact, but I speculate about it. And I think, oh, that would be a good scale for a intelligence to be coordinating the actions of the cell, because the cell itself is a miracle that is hard to explain. It's almost like as hard of a problem as the hard problem of consciousness is, how does a cell come to be out of a
Mhm,
primordial soup? It seems improbable statistically for that to
mhm,
ever occur unless
mhm.
intelligence was guiding it in some fashion.
Yeah. I so you brought out something interesting here with the, the mound building termites showing this pattern. Uh, if there is some sort of hive mind type mentality happening with something like that, and we can see that in multiple different layers at that level, maybe it's easier for us to comprehend that. And when you put together your film Secrets in Plain Sight, maybe we're doing something very, very similar to that from something that's looking far beyond us. And the connections you're making in Secrets in Plain Sight may just be like mound building termites building these intricate tunnels under the ground. Maybe we're just the next level of that, which kind of leads me to another question, maybe about Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance, because you do see like schools of fish and they're moving all in synchronicity and they're moving so fast that they're not communicating through vibration in the water, I don't think. It seems like they're doing it in unison. Do you think this has to do with his theory of morphic resonance, that there is some sort of a connection there when you
Yeah.
see
I
things
think that
happening like this?
his theory of morphic resonance is an interesting way of explaining phenomenon that go beyond the physical domain, that goes beyond materialism. It's a first step to posit that there's some kind of amorphous field that coordinates the actions of all the fish, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I agree. I think that it gets into the philosophy of consciousness, and whether you think it's all physical neurons in the brain that is the only thing that's happening, or is your brain more of a receiver of your mind, which doesn't exist in the physical domain? Imagine that your mind is a non-physical, subtle, it's in a subtle body that's interfacing with your physical body. And that subtle body is not something that we typically can weigh and measure or see, but we can infer its existence from effects that we experience. And um, it seems to me that the mind seems to be more like a receiver of this particular information that's coming through your individual mind, which is non-physical, and then it's relayed into your physical brain, and then it becomes deterministic. So you don't have free will or choice in a deterministic system. It just follows the pathways. But you need this bridge to this other domain where you have free will and choice because it's not physicalized. And I know Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have this theory about how microtubules in the brain possibly host quantum computation in the brain. And if that was so, then that would be a link to another domain where you have things that can be on or off at the same time, a qubit. And that would allow you to have free will and choice. Because in that non-physical domain or in that quantum domain, you can make choices. And then once the choice is made, it propagates through the neuron, and then the electrical impulse is carried deterministically through
The
the
physical body.
highways of your mind and into the nerves of your muscles, and then you perform an action in the world. And
Mm,
without that, your brain is just this cross-wired, cross-circuited electrical bundle of wires that shouldn't really do anything. So
mhm.
I think we're missing something. We're missing a key ingredient in the human brain, which is this link to the ability to make choices, the ability to have one foot outside of determinism. You see, um,
Mhm.
I think this is critically important, and it's very challenging because it's on the edge of science. It's on the edge of our understanding, and we haven't proven it. And maybe we never can, because by definition, it's not something that's physical. It's not something that we can weigh and measure. It's not something that we can simplify down to materialism.
Mhm.
That is the challenge of it all, is trying to explain this. I think just as a writer or as a thinker, everyone has a moment where you're thinking that there's a thought that's you haven't articulated yet, but it's just like on the edge of your awareness. You have this intuition about it, like there's a certain possibilities that could happen. And I think that's when you're reaching into that other domain. And then once you make a decision or manifest that thought, now it becomes physicalized, it becomes deterministic, it becomes something that you now own. But there it's very subtle. It's sort of that like the hypnagogic state that you can get into between waking and sleeping.
Hmm.
It's in that liminal realm where you're reaching into this other domain. And that's where a lot of creativity happens, is because you're able to pull down new ideas,
Hmm.
um, and then manifest them in the physical world. And I think that's particularly what we're here to do as human beings, is do that, is be that bridge between the dumb physical mechanistic world and the sort of non-physical world of the soul, where we have choices and we have more degrees of freedom, more possibilities, because it's not moving, these heavy atoms around. And are they heavy? They're also just a different kind of idea that's in a different mind, if you will. It's hard to express all of this without giving structure, which I try to do in my book, The Unlikely Cartographer. But just
These
like
are, I mean,
off the cuff, it's hard for me to articulate all of this.
well, these are very difficult topics to try and articulate, to even attempt to do it. One of the things I've discovered in doing this podcast, and it doesn't matter which subject or the guest and I are discussing, whether it's UFOs, crop circles, sacred geometry, remote viewing, whatever it is, it always goes back to consciousness. And because I think everybody suspects that this is sort of the final, maybe not the final frontier of human invention and curiosity, but it's a big move on the chessboard that everybody is flirting with who I talk to on this podcast. Everyone agrees that there's something there. Everyone agrees that there are signs of it. It's just, but it's like what you're saying. It's hard to articulate what it is. It's hard to pin it down and say what exactly is this. But we have effects of it. We see signs of it showing up in different phenomenon. And so I think it's there. It's just a matter of getting really smart people, philosophers, physicists, mathematicians, to try and create some sort of a model that everybody can kind of feel comfortable with. And I don't think we're there yet, but it seems like these ideas are becoming more popular. And it does seem like there are more serious academicians taking this very seriously and putting some serious thought into it.
Yeah. And I think probably more people are interested than will articulate that they're interested in it, because they're worried a little bit about, if you're an academic, you have to be really careful about what you say that goes against the dominant paradigm,
Mhm.
because now you're challenging the assumptions of the culture. And that can be dangerous to your career, I guess. I think there's probably more support for going out on a limb in people's internal worlds, but then have they're more reluctant to like write a book about it unless they're retired or something,
Right.
because
Once they're tenured.
yeah, it's a little bit challenging for academics. But I'm not an academic. I'm just a guy who is exploring ideas, and so I write books about them. And I'm not worried about any of those things. So there's a greater freedom in exploration when you're not having to fit inside of a box.
Mhm. And this kind of leads me into the other book that you've written that I want to talk about, called Latent Space, which is a fictional book you've written, which weaves together artificial intelligence, psi abilities, which is a big topic now that's emerging. And then I think you also weave in the non-human intelligence aspect into that book as well, which is very interesting, which is also getting a lot of play right now in these spaces. One of the things I wanted to ask you Well, first of all, how did you come up with the idea for this book? Because I think it's very much what's happening now in this space. How did you come up with the idea for this book?
So it started with the telepathy tapes. Have you heard of that?
Oh, absolutely. I interviewed Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell,
Okay.
who's so obviously you know who that is. That the Telepathy is
Yeah.
based off of her work.
People who are not normally considered psychic can have psychic dreams. They can have very specific information, whether it's like somebody just died and that person comes to them in a dream, or somebody's injured and they have a dream about that person being injured. In fact, the person who developed the EEG, the device that is used by neurologists to measure brain waves.
Hans Berger.
Yes, Hans Berger. What
Okay.
inspired him to invent the EEG was an experience in which his sister contacted him because she was afraid he was involved in a serious accident, and she contacted him by telegram. And he was in an accident where he was almost killed.
So I listened to all of that podcast, was really intrigued by it. And I found it really validating to my worldview and my philosophy, because here we have individuals who exhibit these abilities, which our dominant paradigm of materialism could not explain. Like, how can people communicate with each other at a distance without using electronic communication? They're just using their minds. There's an inner technology that they're exhibiting that we all potentially have access to. And what I found exciting about that is that I can't remember the specifics, but there was a person who was not telepathic, who is like a caregiver, who some of these telepathic people wanted to communicate with her and they were able to do it. And so it was a skill she was able to learn. And I find that really encouraging, that it isn't just like you're born with this. It's that if you have a certain disability, you're more prone to developing these abilities, but everyone has that capacity. And I find that part of the human condition really interesting. And so I was fascinated by that. And also at the same time, I'm very interested in technology and artificial intelligence and all of the things that are going on with brain machine interfaces, and speculating about how that could work and how that might have a real conflict with these people that have telepathy. You see, telepathy is something that is an inner technology. It is understanding how to work in the non-physical realm. And the brain machine interface is 100% physicalized. It's measuring the electrical signals in the brain and using artificial intelligence to sort out signal from noise in that, using Fourier transforms in math and other things that I'm not aware of. But it's an interesting area that I found those two ideas at the core of what I was trying to do with the book, because they collide. And they collide because they're fundamentally different ways of viewing consciousness. See, one is a materialistic view of consciousness, that it's all in your brain. And the other one shows that your brain is important, but it's actually just a receiver of this other realm. And so the physicalized version would want to flatten that out. It would want to smooth all of those psi impulses out. It wouldn't understand what they are, and it would think that they were noise. And so there's a group of people in the novel who get together through what I call latent space, which is this non-physical space where these people that have psi find each other. And it's led by this medical examiner woman who has a near-death experience, the protagonist here. And it really upends her whole worldview, because formerly she was very much into science and looked at everything in a materialistic way. And then she had this undeniable first-person experience during her near-death experience of rich phenomenological experiences that existed outside when she was dead, essentially brain dead. And yet she's having all these experiences, and she saw this sacred geometry, and she saw beings there. And so then when she came back, it really landed especially well with her because she has this thing called hyperthymesia, which is like perfect memory, a perfect memory of things that happened to you in your own life. It's also called highly superior autobiographical memory. And my wife tends to have this ability herself. It's really incredible. She can remember almost everything that's happened to her in her life. And so she remembers, like, don't you remember we went to that restaurant in like 1997? I'm like, no, I don't remember that at all. That's so long ago. How can you know that?
He just pulls it out.
She knows it, and she knows who we met and all kinds of things
Details.
that are not in my mind at all. And so I imbued the protagonist with this capacity because she had this vivid near-death experience that she remembers with perfect detail. And so it really upends her whole worldview. And so you follow her arc of discovery of this whole new world. And then she meets up with these other people through latent space, and they kind of go on an adventure, and they're pitted against this artificial super intelligence that see more and more people in society are putting on these brain machine interfaces. And they find it really threatening because it kind of would eliminate psi from your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, they felt like they're just at the beginning of this whole exploration, that this is actually a real thing, that humans have this capacity. And it happens to be we're just discovering that now, especially through the telepathy tapes in real life. And at the same time, we're potentially going to be wearing these headsets that think of consciousness as a physicalized phenomenon. And there's going to be conflict with that. There's a collision of worldviews. And so that's what this novel is about.
And I mean, everything you're talking about right now, everything that's in this book, I think is so apparent that this is what's going on right now, that there is sort of this little macro battle happening with human consciousness. It's almost like human consciousness as a whole is struggling to make itself aware enough that these latent psi abilities are most likely very real in every human being, and that through just not being aware of it, maybe some social conditioning, maybe cultural ramifications, the rise of the materialistic world, we've kind of brushed these things off. Where I'll bet you, if you ask most people, they've probably had some sort of weird psi occurrence that's happened to them more than once in their life, but it gets discarded. And so that muscle atrophies probably a little bit. But then you have these individuals that are in the telepathy tapes that you're talking about that are doing this naturally every single day. This is a part of their world. And it's the evidence is overwhelming that this is a thing. The tests that they've done are pretty ironclad. I know they're working on more double-blind placebo tests, which are difficult to do with the nonverbal autistic children, but that's coming. And once that gets nailed down, I think you're going to see a real split in this world, because you're going to have people that they're going to gravitate towards this. And you might even see studios that pop up, like remote viewing studios, to help develop your intuition, to help strengthen these abilities. And you can imagine the legal ramifications for people that get really good at this and, decide to do this for maybe not so great reasons. I mean, that's going to be a whole.
That the CIA has had remote viewers for decades.
Yes. And so you can imagine. And so then this kind of leads me back to the disclosure conversation, because I think disclosure is about the fact that they have crash recoveries and that they probably have some biologics and some things that are very, very strange. But I think the bigger conversation is more just about control. And how do you lose control of a population? Well, if they start to develop psi abilities, I think this is when you lose control. And this is when things really start to unravel.
You see, with psi abilities, you can't lie. It's a direct communication. It's not like you can deceive someone while they're looking into your very thoughts. And so that is very difficult for those who wish to control and deceive. And that's why in my novel, I brought in the non-human intelligences who were very interested in this emerging team of telepaths who were exhibiting this kind of middle path between using the technology of the physical world and the computers and the superintelligence and so on, and also developing their psi abilities. They were kind of leveraging both aspects. And the non-human intelligences were interested in that. And I speculate that it's probably like a prerequisite to becoming a species that travels to the stars and has interactions with other non-human intelligences, that you develop psi abilities, that you develop, because you can't, it would become clear if you were bent on conquest or destruction or something.
The galactic neighborhood's not going to be cool with that.
No. And so also once you develop those abilities, you realize you have this self-realization of who you are is consciousness. You're also this person having these experiences, but it's like, the way I think of it, it's like the tide that floats all boats is consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you realize that you are that rising tide that floats all the boats, you're not just one boat. Then you have a lot in common with all of the other boats on the water, because you are actually in all of them too, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
It's just an illusion that you're not. That's the delusion of dissociation, is believing that you are this person playing this game. It's like when you play a video game, it's like you got stuck in so hard that you've forgotten that you're this person on the sofa with a controller in your hands. You've become that character in that game so much that you've forgotten who you really are. It's like a figure ground shift has to occur. And I think that humanity has to go through that figure ground shift to realize who we are before we're going to be like welcomed into the galactic neighborhood. Because you're very dangerous when you don't know who you are and you assume that you're just this person who has your own agenda and the normal thing that we assume every day.
Yeah, it's like a child carrying around a machine gun. It's like you don't know what you are yet. You're not ready to handle whatever it is you think you're doing. And so maybe there's restrictions on letting a group depart for the stars. If there is some sort of observation going on, and I would argue that there's some sort of observation going on, it's probably, you're probably looking at something that's looking at a species that is getting dangerously close to going out amongst the stars, but has not evolved spiritually enough yet to know what they are and what this is really all about. You probably have to have that before you're going to be allowed to go to the next level. And I think that's what we're seeing playing out here in Congress, the disclosure movement, and this squashing and this battle going back and forth of what is actually going on in secrecy. Because I would imagine, like you said, that the people that are promoting secrecy and national defense, there may be subsets of those three-letter agencies that are fully aware and fully primed. That game may be slowly deteriorating because people are waking up to what they are a little bit, and things are changing.
When you realize who you are, you're also the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans. You're all of that. Consciousness is all of that, and all animals and everything in all planets. And there's only one consciousness. And so when you realize, when you go through that boundary, you're not interested in control and domination and all these kind of primate behaviors that we have just seem laughably primitive once you realize who you are. But humanity hasn't quite made that step. And I think maybe in 1,000 years or something, maybe we,
Yeah, how many more generations, of just
yeah,
old thinking have to be cycled through until you have this sort of cleansing and this mass awareness? Maybe you have like a Gladwellian tipping point, and
yeah, exactly.
everyone
I
is
think
just
that
there.
and some people get it, right? But we're just a minority. We're just a rounding error, right now. And yeah, it'll take quite a while of development for us to get as a species to get to that place where we have this figure ground shift. But I think there's a danger that we have right now, which is the kind of rush towards physicalizing everything and having everything turned into an AI. An AI is like the collective human consciousness, everything that we've ever expressed as a species and made digitized is part of the AI now, like all books and all videos and every piece of data that they can scrape, they have. And so that represents everything humanity has already expressed, but it doesn't capture all of the things that we haven't pulled down from the ether yet. It doesn't represent that inner technology, that inspiration, where ideas come from. We, as human beings, we are this bridge where we have access to that realm that the AI does not have access to. And so I find that really interesting that we're in this middle place. But the danger is that we go all the way to the physicalized side.
Go all in.
And I was inspired partially in this book by the philosophy of Rudolf Steiner and how he had this polarity between the physicalized aspect, which he called Ahrimanic. He used this Zoroastrian demon called Ahriman to represent that. And then he used the other pole, the Luciferian. So he used a Christian demon to represent the opposite pole, which is to become completely spiritualized, to go into that non-physical realm completely. But he identified them both as demons because if you go all the way to one pole or the other, you're kind of in trouble.
Mhm.
We're supposed to be in the middle. And he called
Mhm.
that the Christ consciousness. But I don't favor the religious terminology here because I feel like it has a lot of baggage with it. So I didn't use any of that in my book. But I was consciously thinking of these ideas when I was crafting the story of having characters that went completely physicalized and they got involved with this brain machine interface and all. There's a whole arc of the story that goes in that direction. And then there's other characters that go the other way and they retreat into latent space and they find these really peaceful, blissful realms there. And they kind of eventually, there's one character who goes too far in that regard and she leaves her physical body and her physical body dies. But
Mm.
she, her consciousness is still alive there in that other realm. So I wanted to show like the dangers of going too far in either direction and
Mm.
realizing that our task as humans is to kind of be in the middle and pulling those ideas down from spirit and manifesting them in the physical world is kind of where we shine as human beings, in my opinion. And so that's what I was trying to show with this book is this polarity that's expressed through psi on one side and through artificial superintelligence with the brain machine interface on the other side, and how we don't want to reject both. We want to kind of synthesize both in some kind of meaningful way. And so I advocate using AI and learning about it, but not becoming so like stuck in that, and also explore your spiritual side and find inspiration in a really humanistic way. Disconnect from technology from time to time. I just went to the UK and did this lovely sacred geometry workshop there where we studied the patterns of the Alhambra And we spent 3 days just drawing everything by hand. And it was really lovely to be away from technology and just do this purely non-digital experience for 3 days. It was super relaxing and energizing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I mean, I wanna kinda wrap it up here in a second, Scott, but I just wanna, like, add on to that sentiment there. There is something very that connects with you when you use a compass and a straight edge and you're doing whatever sort of artistic endeavor you're doing with geometry, or if you're doing something by hand, there is something that touches you a little bit deeper because I'll do sacred geometry using GeoGebra, and I've redone multiple crop circles on there. And GeoGebra is a fantastic tool because you can check for accuracies up to 13 decimal places, and you can look at it and you can really dial things in. There's things you could do on GeoGebra that you can't do with a compass and straight edge. Yet I will tell you that when I do a complicated pattern with a compass and straight edge, there is something that touches me a little bit more psychologically. If I do it several days in a row, my dreams start to become a little bit more vivid. I remember them more. There's something going on there with that connects with you in a very, very personal way. And I don't know what that is, but I know it's there. Um,
I had that exact same experience. For years, I would draw things in AutoCAD, which is similar. It's a vector program in some ways similar to GeoGebra, I imagine. But still, when you draw by hand, you're involving your body more. You're involving more of yourself in the process. And it touches deeper. It gets to your heart more. I think the computer and the software aspect is much more mental. So it's hitting you more here, whereas the drawing by hand hits you more in your heart. And therefore it's more moving. It's more meaningful in a way.
very
But
good.
I think that you've got it. It's important to do the computer stuff too, because it provides accuracy and aspects of it that you don't get by hand. And so it's kind of a middle path example here, where you want to use the different modalities and leverage them for what they're best at doing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Scott, I think you knocked it out of the park with both of these books, The Unlikely Cartographer and Late in Space. They're both very poignant for what's going on in the world right now. I encourage everybody to go out there and take a look at these fantastic works. Scott, before we go, tell everybody how they can find you, what you got going on, and then we'll wrap it up.
So you can check out my work at sacredgeometryacademy.com. It has all my books and my sacred geometry courses and videos, and a whole wealth of information is there waiting for you to check out.
Awesome. Well, Scott, I could talk to you for another 3 hours. We'll have to get this one set up again. We need to catch up more often.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Matt.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, everybody.